Chaps, we're going to fly straight in. We've got Stuart, myself and Phil, who's a trustee. We're going to go straight in because, funny enough, I was on the radio a couple of days ago talking on BBC Radio Suffolk, talking about men and grief. And yet again, stats are showing quite clearly that men are just crap at talking at it, about it. And Stuart, you was on a video last week?
2 weeks ago.
Was it a couple of weeks ago? Yeah, obviously you've been doing fundraising for us, which we're eternally grateful for, but you touched base on that topic of grief and your wife, and it's quite a hard hitting, and I felt like I cut you short in that, so I do apologise because it was grieving, but I just wanted a bit of a natter, and hopefully other people can learn from you. So what's your story on that, mate? Because it's quite a hard hitting.
As I said to you guys, I lost my wife July previous year. She had a long-term battle with mental health challenges. She was struggling with alcoholism and anorexia, and you know, she fought hard, and unfortunately she lost a battle June 13, 2019, I guess. So you know, it's, you know, I've been reflecting on the conversation today as to kind of, you know, what I could say, I guess, is that my big learns over certainly the last couple of months have been that, you know, as her journey ended, and it was obviously very hard for us both, my journey kind of started, I guess. And yeah, it's been a very, very hard period of my life. But as I said to you when we first spoke on that group call, I was very, very lucky to be blessed with people to guide me through the grief process. And I feel well placed to kind of talk about it because I worked hard through my grief process to bring myself literally back to life, really. You know, it was a very dark time.
Wow. So, do you, if I just go straight in, because what I was going to say, do you know, I've started it now, so I apologise, but like, you seem so switched on, and my brother was killed in Southend a few years ago, well 10 years ago, and I reckon it took 6 years. Yeah. And even now, I'm still not 100% sure whether I'm truly over it, and that there are certain triggers for me, like I don't ever play consoles anymore.
Yeah.
At all, I just can't do it, and I feel really bad for my boys because they're like, "Oh, I'll play this, that, and the other." I can't really do it. Do you? Because you seem clued up and switched on, but do you still have triggers or anything like that? Or, I don't want to trigger you, by the way, but
again, you know, thank you for that. But you know, I feel well placed to talk. I think that, you know, the grief process kind of evolves, I guess, and it changes, and you know, I'm not ashamed to say that, you know, most days, you know, I'll have part of the day where I need to continue grieving. I cry a lot. You know, I have a memorial bench very close to the house on the River Thames, where I can go most days and kind of reflect on where I'm at and what's happened. But, you know, I think I said to you again when we spoke previously, I felt very motivated that my wife wouldn't want me to fall apart. I've got a lot to kind of rebuild and live for. You know, I think the hardest thing through grief initially is you don't see a future, I guess. You know, when you're really in that bad place, you don't see a viable future. You just kind of feel that your life is finished, and you know, and I don't feel like that anymore. I feel, you know, kind of at peace that there is a future, but there is still grief, and it's a really weird blend of emotions. But you know, my kids are a massive motivation in my life, and you know, I'm blessed with really amazing friends who, you know, encourage me all the time. And I've mentioned to you guys before, the MANUP experience has been a massive trigger for improvement. I think, you know, I felt I was doing well, but, you know, my good friend Lindsay encouraged me into some of the MANUP projects, and then really encouraged me to start talking, which I don't think I had for a while. My grief counselling had finished maybe 6 months ago, and talking to you guys and feeling like it's making a difference for other people is a huge motivation, you know, and that's going to help me with the next stage of the process, I guess.
Wow.
So you mentioned last time when we spoke a couple of weeks back, the thing that kind of intrigued me, because like when you're in those pits of, you know, feelings where you think that your life's, you know, can't go on, and you mentioned you had a great support network there who put you in touch with this this lady, and it was kind of that initial call, and it was, you were only due to speak for a little bit, but it ended up being, I think you said it was like 5 or 6 hours you were on the phone to her talking through. Yeah, what were the stages there? Because that is, it's always that, I think that first step, particularly for myself, was just the hardest part is even just talking about it.
I mean, I think the stages for me were, look, my wife, I knew how ill my wife was. You know, the surgeon in intensive care, she was in intensive care for a month, and she'd visit hospital regularly for a few years, struggling with liver damage and different stuff. But he sat me down and said, do you realize, you know, your wife actually, with her conditions of alcoholism and anorexia, that only 75% of people make it past the age of 40. And I was kind of shocked at that. My wife was 43, and he said, you know, she's done okay, actually. But, you know, going through watching her die in hospital in intensive care for a month, the last day particularly, it took 17 hours I was called into hospital at 3 a.m. and they said she'd go pretty quickly, but she didn't. It was 17 hours. So that was a hard scar at the end, and that needed a lot of work. I said to you on the first call that the first couple of days I was weirdly robotic. I was okay. In fact, I came back from the hospital in an Uber, and I jumped out the car because I spotted a friend, and I jumped out, and he kind of said, how are you? And I was like, oh, Nicky's just died. And I completely ruined him in the high street. And, you know, I was almost like the Grim Reaper. One of the things with grief is that you do feel sometimes like you are the walking Grim Reaper. People still cross the road even now not to talk to me. But after that first couple of days, like I said to you on our first call, it was that third morning where everything just fell apart. And, you know, I'm a guy who is very level-headed and very strong. And I just, I just felt like I was dying, basically, and I had nothing to give. And it was just that kind of almost spiritual intervention where my friend texted me, as I said to you, and said, call this number, or how I was. And I said, I am broken, and I couldn't get out of bed. And it was that intervention that I think, you know, almost saved my life, probably put me back on a path to redemption. And it was a long process. And as you say, it was 6 hours day one, 800 hours in total. You know, the highs and lows of the process. But yeah, wow. I mean, you know, it was just so important. And that's why, you know, I feel so compelled to support you guys and work with you guys, that if you're not talking, you're not repairing. And, you know, I don't like to think about what would have happened if I hadn't had that support.
I will say straight away, that little 2 seconds there, you're not talking, you're not repairing, that's so going to be cut into a clip. So thank you very much for that. Because that I've not heard that expression before. That's quite damning, actually. That's good. And it's so true. But sorry, Phil, did I cut you up there, mate? Sorry.
No. I think that point as well. It's almost one of the fundamental principles of why we've all rallied behind what MANUP is, right? It is about talking. Often that's the first step towards repair, or at least seeing that there's opportunity, I guess. So yeah, quite quite a statement.
Well, I think with that, like, the whole thing about talking is you're also educating each other without realizing it. And a proof in the pudding of that, actually, when I was on the radio the other day, I've forgotten the presenter's name, but it's irrelevant. I said in there, was talking about something, and I said from one of the videos, I said, one of the people, what was it? They were like, "What this other guy who was on the show, he was just like, I don't want to talk to my mum because her husband died, which will be his dad, and how could I offload?" But funny enough, for some reason, I reminisced from Amy, who's one of the guests a month or 2 months ago. I said, actually, what she said is, when people don't talk to me about stuff, you're actually denying my right to help you.
Yeah.
And I think where I'm going with that one is actually, I would never ever have heard that expression and thought change my opinion of that if I hadn't had that conversation with her. Have I made sense, or have I just been trying to be all?
I mean, some of the most important interventions in my world were friends that were not scared to just come and sit and just watch me go through the grief process, because I must have, there's many weeks where I don't remember what happened, and I talk to those friends now and I was just falling apart. You know, I was just hysterical. I was, you know, laughing, crying, you know, just a basket case. And I think the biggest learn for me, and the biggest thing that I try to do, you know, with my time, is that if I hear somebody's having a tough time, or I hear somebody is going through something similar, I'm not scared to pick up the phone and just say, look, you know, you might not want to talk to me, but I am here and I'm not scared to talk to you. Because I mentioned earlier in the call, it's the isolation, I think, of grief that's the hard thing. Because once you've done the funeral and you've done, you know, where everyone rallies and everybody disappears, suddenly everyone goes back to their normal life, but your life's not normal. And it becomes a really dangerous phase of the grief process, that you're so isolated that that's the point where you need like people around you to kind of help you through those phases of grief, to make sure that you're repairing gently, I guess.
Well, you're basically relearning how to live, aren't you?
Yeah, it's scary. I mean, you know, there was, and even now, I'll be honest with you, there's times where I have a mechanism of making myself feel better, and it revolves around exercise and walking and fresh air, and I listen to music, which is a good repair for me. So I can wake up and suddenly not feel good again. And you know, actually this morning was a bit wobbly, but I know how to deal with it, and I know that I go out and I get that flushed out my system, and then I'm back. And I think that, you know, learning those things and having people around you that understand those things will aid the recovery process. I'm not going to sit in front of anybody and say, this is going to be okay, or, you know, you're going to be fine in 6 months, because you're not, right? You just have to be, what I'd like to try and do is just be an example to people that you can rebuild, and life can be okay. And you know, no matter how dark and low you get, there is a route back, and there is a future, I guess, it would be what I would say to somebody.
If I can just ask one thing then, because funny enough, we spoke about this on in that thing the other day with somebody else, is one of the biggest things is why they won't speak to their let's say their mates.
Yeah.
Is they're like, I don't want to cry in front of my mates, because they'll take the piss. But you've just been quite open. Actually, you're in quite a bit of a state. What did your mates do?
Different reactions, I guess. Some were uncomfortable, you know. My colleagues kind of see it a lot. I'll watch something, and you know, there's loads of triggers for me. Like yesterday, I was sat at my desk with my team, and a Facebook memory came up, and it was the 4-year anniversary of my wife and I summiting Kilimanjaro, and it ruined me for about 5 minutes. And you know, so there's people react differently, but I think that the openness of being emotional, you know, when we talked again the first time, I'm not hardwired to be emotional. I'm you know, northern bloke, you know, tough as boots. And I mean, I said I posted a video this morning actually about, you know, I'm doing a walk this weekend, and I'm going to promote you guys again this weekend. But I had an interesting reaction from some people through the first video. Loads of people, mainly everybody, just so supportive of me talking. But some people kind of saying, are you really doing that? You look quite vulnerable. You're kind of opening yourself up. Is that what you want to be like perceived as? And it made me a little bit angry, actually. I was like, that's exactly what I want. I said, if you feel uncomfortable watching it, that says more about you than me. And also, I'm happy with that, because people probably don't expect me to be talking like this. And if that saves people and gives anybody hope for the future, then I'm all in.
I can't. anything on that. I totally not agree with you. I think you've just absolutely nailed everything there.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I think that was just wow. Yeah, I thought.
Thanks.
Yeah. Can you help us out there, Phil?
No, it's as you kind of know, Dan, it's like so from my own personal experience, I've been almost a little bit kind of cold to it because I've always been very, very pragmatic. Everyone has different coping mechanisms with grief, and I've lost, very close members of the family. I've had, incredibly close friends, like family members who have passed, particularly recently. And my kind of coping approach has always been about just, pragmatically being able to openly talk about it. And then trying to focus on the good things in the memory, because life's in a constant state of flux and things, will always change. But it's I suppose my way of coping with it, I wouldn't say is necessarily particularly healthy. But on the flip side of that, one of my oldest and closest friends, who lives sort of locally as well, won't mind me saying, but his dad passed away about 6 to 8 months ago. But it was a very, very kind of protracted, drawn out process, because he was incredibly ill, went into hospital, unfortunately, during COVID. So that then affected the ability for him to be visited. He contracted sepsis and other things, and then sort of deteriorated. So it was almost like the grieving process already began before he even passed. And my friend is an incredibly emotional being. Is one of the reasons I love him so much. Is he's not your typical kind of bloke, man up, shoulders back. He's a big fella, but he's often known to expose his raw emotions, and he's kind of dealt with various other mental health issues. But he always came to me to be that friend, to be able to sit there, because I was the pragmatic one that could just, happily sit there and let him just pour his heart out and kind of grieve and cry about it. And I've never felt particularly uncomfortable about it. Because I can kind of see the pragmatic side. But it was an interesting one in that circumstance, because his father I was very, very, very close to him as well. Spent every Christmas with them for the last 10 plus years. So attending his funeral just during COVID as well was, incredibly difficult experience for me, because I've always then come out of it and, been able to sort of strut on and carry on with life, and then focus on the good things and the good memories. But that was a slightly different experience, because it sort of hit me a little bit differently. But completely agree about, sometimes it's just, some people need to talk, some people just need to be heard. And it's equally, it's not about providing solutions, it's just being there. And I think the thing that touched on what you said there, Stuart, about that void afterwards. You go through the emotional roller coaster, you have even the legal elements to it, sorting out probate and all of that, that comes along with it. And you're having to go through all of this legality and paperwork, and you're still dealing with the heartache and the grief on it. And then comes the lull, when everyone then does return to their life and their existence. But I think that's is a bit of a key learning and a takeaway for me, is actually is to not necessarily take that lull for granted and continue that. Because it doesn't stop, as you say. For some people, it might, and it doesn't return quite as much. But for others, it's going to be a fundamental thing they're carrying for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, I think the only way to combat that is just by talking. And do you know what? If you've got a mate who'll I'm the kind of person, look, Phil knows me more than you. So I'm the kind of person, I don't know, if something happened, you told me that, and you started welling up and crying, I would feel pretty awkward, but I would be there. 6 months' time, I'll probably take the piss.
Yeah,
not to be out of order, but I'll be like, "Oh, Stuart, do you remember that time when you're snotting all over the place and all this kind of stuff?" But actually, do you know what? In my head, that just builds up a bond, which is a bond only you and that person can have.
Is that a coping mechanism as well? Because that was, upon reflection, even at my friend's father's funeral, I was there cracking jokes. And he found it awkward, but I know deep down in my heart as well, as the gentleman that passed away, he had an incredibly hilarious, filthy, inappropriate sense of humor, and it's exactly what he would have wanted. You know, he wouldn't want you to sit, you know, see his whole kind of family. So I agree on that point. I'm much like you. I'll be the first to kind of crack a joke about it, but it's never the insensitivity.
No, exactly.
And I read my eulogy to the lady who ran. I couldn't speak at the wedding. I was just too emotional, but she read it for me. And I said actually in my words that it was important for us to always celebrate and talk about Nikki, not to be scared of it. You know, the kids talk about her all the time. You know, it's really, really a positive thing. And her friends joke about her. And, you know, we do celebrate her rather than kind of mourn her, which was important to me from day one, really.
Mm.
But I think that's key, and then we'll have to call this one there because we're tapping over that 20. But I think one of the things, and I'm not a grief counsellor, I'm not a counsellor or anything like that. So I'm just saying how I see it after I've spoken to many people, and I've lost my brother and stuff like that. But is to try and remember what the person who died, what they would want you to do. I think that's the key, and I don't think anyone who dies around us would want you to sit there bawling your eyes out and shutting people away. And I think for me that's just how I see it. But again, just my disclaimer before I get messages: I'm not a counsellor. I'm not qualified to say that. I'm just a bloke who gives a task.
With exactly the point is that's the number one thing that drives me is that I know my wife would not want me in the fetal position, not doing well, not, you know, celebrating the kids and living my life. And it's my number one driver.
But it's fair to say it's a uniter though, isn't it? Because it's the human condition. It's like when we're talking about things like mental health, it's not everyone will experience depression, for example, to that degree. But it's fair to say as a human being, absolutely everybody on this planet, with color, creed, background, religion, age, will experience grief in some shape or form. It's part of the human condition.
Exactly. That was a good call. Thank you very much.
Good to see you guys.
Let me just hit the